Welcome to the Exhorter podcast, where we aim to stir up love and good works through bite-sized biblical discussion. Kyle, you have our topic for today. What are we talking about? And I should actually preface, we have three of the four here right now. We have Nate, we have Kyle, we have myself. Paul's out of town.
No, you shouldn't mention that. We should just every few minutes be like, Paul, you don't want to say anything? No?
Do you have something to say?
Okay, Paul's uncharacteristically quiet today, so.
I might be a little bitter because he took his wife to San Diego. Nice little destination spot. It is really hot here. It's like 112, 113, so they're escaping the heat. Lucky for them. But we're gonna.
It's like that level 2 in Super Mario Brothers on original Nintendo where the sun chases you and tries to kill you. That's Fresno in the summer.
That's Fresno in the summer. Well, yep. I know there's worse places out there, but.
Well, I want to talk about new experiences where you feel a little bit out of place. So. That's not a very common thing for me because I always have so much confidence in everything I do, and that's just how I am.
Humble too. You're humble too.
Incredibly humble. But there is one example that sticks out. A number of years ago when I lived in Utah, we used to play volleyball after church, and someone got the bright idea that we should do a rec league. And I was like, okay, that'd be fun. So I signed up, and I kept getting penalized for things that I had no clue. I was like, well, I do this all the time. Sunday nights, after church, and it's no one says anything. I'd never played organized volleyball before, and I was finding all kinds of things like you can't do a backward spike with an open hand. You have to, you have to kind of punch the ball. You have to close your hand in a fist if you're going to hit it backwards like that, or that something that I thought was a set. If the ball spins a certain way, they'll call you for a carry. It's like. And I just kept getting frustrated because I kept thinking like, I didn't know this. And it was making me want to quit. But I stuck it out, and, it's not like I got any good at volleyball, but I got to the point where I learned enough to enjoy the experience. Then I moved to Texas and stopped playing. But that's just one of those experiences where I felt like a fish out of water. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand the rules. And that was a discouragement to me. And I bring up an example in volleyball because what I really want to talk about, of course, is the church. And when a visitor walks through our doors, what is their experience like? And so the reason I bring up volleyball is because I've spent my whole life in the Church of Christ, and it's the most familiar thing to me. Like on a vacation, maybe you guys can relate. I might be in a different city, different town, different state, and not recognize anything, not recognize the climate. It's totally different atmosphere. But then I walk into a Church of Christ on a Sunday morning, and instantly I'm at home, even though I don't know anybody. It's just a comforting environment.
So it's kind of like Costco or Walmart or Target, right? They're all organized the same. I can go into Walmart in Alabama, and it's the same as Walmart in Fresno.
Or like when I'm a guest preacher somewhere, I don't really need them to tell me when to get up to preach. I just kind of instinctively know when to do it because it's not that different from here at Clovis or anywhere else I've lived in a church I've been a part of. So for me, church feels like a very familiar place, but I understand the concept of feeling out of place and how discouraging that can be. So even though it's very familiar and comfortable to me, I would hate for someone to walk in the doors here at the church in Clovis and feel discouraged or frustrated, like they don't understand what's going on or they're confused, and to walk away feeling like, I didn't like that. I don't want to come back.
Like they walk in and there are some unspoken rules that they just don't know, and they just automatically feel out of place because it's like, oh, well,
kind of embarrassing. Like, I didn't know I was supposed to do this. Or it always bothers me when a visitor says, I feel so underdressed. And well, that's not.
Or I didn't know we don't clap during songs, because that would be really uncomfortable.
You just don't do that. You don't clap during songs?
Hey, you just start laying into it,
Yeah. So first of all, I've got the two of you guys here. You guys are deacons at the church here in Clovis, and I think you guys share the task of overseeing the visitor process. Let me just ask you guys, this might be helpful information for other people out there. What is your hope for an ideal visitor experience? What would you like to see happen when a visitor walks through our doors? What are some things you want to see happen?
Can we get live Q&A right now? It would be really nice to
let me get the manual visitors out to answer that question.
We have visitors call in and tell us right now, please?
Yes. Call John. So I'm just thinking of
well, you could talk about the door greeters because I know you work on that too.
Yeah. Well, I want visitors to leave feeling like I would do that again. I would come back. This is a very warm, welcoming group of people. And I think that does start with the door greeters. And so I think your question was, what would my expectation of an ideal visitor experience be? They walk in the door, they're greeted by someone with a big smile on their face and a handshake, and they start a simple but friendly conversation. It's more than just, hey, how's it going? And then on to the next person. But hey, how's it going? I'm so-and-so, and talk at least a little bit. And then we would like to get their contact information. Obviously, they're interested. They showed up. So we would love to get their contact information if they'd be willing to fill out a visitor card. And then it would be my hope that they could get passed off to an usher who would help them find a seat, because, I've worshiped here for 7 years now, and sometimes I'm intimidated walking into the auditorium and people are standing and talking to each other, and I'm like, whoa, where does my family usually sit again?
Yeah. Or you find a place, an empty spot on a pew, but it looks like someone's Bible, in a carrier or something is sitting right there. Or it's like, is this someone's place? Or there's some sort of personal effects there when you're just thinking, maybe I shouldn't sit there.
Yeah. If that happens, do you scoot past it and then sit down in the middle, or do you just go to a different aisle?
Well, these are the questions that you ask. Am I supposed to sit here? Am I not supposed to sit here?
Well, John, what are some things you'd like to see from a visitor's experience?
I'm just kind of jumping on board with Nate here to help out with this kind of effort, I think, recently. So, but what I've been thinking about is, in anything you do, setting realistic or any expectations is important. And so we've talked about trying to do some things either through the bulletin or some sort of handout that at least kind of gives them a little insight to what to expect. If you've never been in a Church of Christ, or you've never been into a church gathering, what is this plate passing in front of me, and why are there no instruments, or what's going on during the worship? That then it explains what they're going to, and how long they're going to be there for, and how long the preacher might be preaching. I think setting those expectations up front, that might be a real good thing. And so we talked about maybe there's something that we can do to communicate that. And sometimes websites do that for people. They'll check the website before they go there, understand what time to.
Don't turn this against me, but a welcome video is a really good way to communicate that as well.
That too. There's lots of resources people will use, but I think giving some expectations of what to expect is an important thing. And then, that positioning of where you're sitting in the building, you're most comfortable, I think, in the back outside edge. You just kind of on the periphery, you can kind of look and see what everyone else is doing, and then I can follow along, But when the only pews open and available are right up front in the middle, that's really intimidating. I would be intimidated with that as well. So
yeah, it's kind of interesting, almost a reversal of James chapter 2. What we don't want to see happen when a visitor walks in. It says in James chapter 2, "For if there should come into your assembly a man with gold rings and fine apparel, and there should also come in a poor man in filthy clothes, and you pay attention to the one wearing the fine clothes and say to him, 'You sit here in a good place,' and say to the poor man, 'You stand there,' or 'Sit here at my footstool,' have you not shown partiality among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts?" You might think the place of honor would be up front, but today people would be more comfortable sitting in the back in most situations. And that's an important consideration as well.
We had a strong emphasis in the congregation I grew up in about dress. And so that was such a big thing. To this day, my conscience has kind of been seared with kind of a perspective sometimes where I equate someone's dress sometimes with their perceived engagement or desire to take this seriously. I mean, it's not always the case, even with members, let alone a visitor. I think that suppressing that perspective or urge to kind of eye them up, it makes you a little bit more, open and able to greet, but also we shouldn't have that expectation on people. It gets too much in the way of what we're trying to do here.
So I shouldn't wear my tuxedo that I just bought.
No, Jim.
No.
Yeah. And of course, I'd recommend going back and listening to our episode if you haven't already about how one should dress for worship. We have a pretty good conversation
As a point,
there.
Counterpoint, I took the affirmative. You took the negative on
and maybe the traditional notion that for the last century or so is dress your best. Maybe our best can be too much sometimes, but I think there's some individual reflection required. As I said earlier, I find it very frustrating when that's a visitor's impression that I feel so underdressed. And It doesn't mean that sloppy is not at all what I'm suggesting everyone wears. And, there's nothing wrong with dressing coat and tie. But there's a reason why before I get up in there to preach, I've got my coat off and sleeves rolled up. And as soon as I'm done preaching, the coat comes off and I loosen the tie a little bit.
That's because it's 112 outside.
Yeah, because I'm a big, fat, sweaty guy, but also...
We don't need a visualization. But there is a...
I want to be presentable
There's
and relatable.
There's an inviting perspective about someone who is not a three-piece suit or tuxedo standing in front of a door. We are in a constant state of comparison throughout our lives. We look at the people across from us and we think, okay, how do I fit in with this conversation or in this place? And I think one of the goals in trying to be more inviting to visitors and bring people in is to just reduce that a little bit and make them feel more comfortable. And if that could be, but I do think the pendulum can swing the other way.
Absolutely.
And as members and as people who are here.
I don't want someone to walk in and get the impression that we haven't prepared to be here.
It can go the other way.
Right. Yeah. Don't swing the pendulum too far the other way for sure. Well, let's just talk really practical about some things we can do. And I think it starts with just a visitor's first impression. And when we have the work days at the church building, that's important. The weekly upkeep of the exterior of the building is excellent and it's always in good shape. But sometimes we need those projects. And I'm glad that guys and, men and women turn out for the work days we have here, because I think that's important. We don't want to focus too much on the exterior and, the pretty building and the lovely grounds, but also that can be a turnoff for someone. It starts with their very first impression, which could be the website or when they initially drive up. And so we want to keep things neat and tidy. Throughout the week, when I see trash, I pick it up because it's easy to do. And we can all just do simple things like that to make this a good place to be. We want this to be a pleasant atmosphere because what we do here in this building is more important than the building itself, infinitely more. But we don't want the building and the facilities to become a distraction. So just their very first impression when a visitor drives up, I think we want to offer something that's clean and presentable and generally pleasant to be in.
When I think of first impression, I just think of a warm smile, someone who's genuinely interested in knowing your name, in meeting you. Let's say we didn't have a great first impression with our website or the grounds, our building and where it's at. But if the first personal impression you have is someone who is really interested in meeting you and has a big smile on their face and wants to know you better, then I think most of the time, if that person's going to come back.
Yeah.
And they're going to feel welcomed.
Romans chapter 12 and verse 10 says, "Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor giving preference to one another." I think if that's visible, if we're displaying that kind of fervent brotherly love for one another, I think if that is apparent, that we're putting our best foot forward. And other simple things too. How many times have you guys had to go to the store or go somewhere and the parking lot's full and you just like, I'll do it some other time?
My wife goes to the store. I don't go to the store.
Yeah.
I cannot relate.
Yeah, I do that all the time. Or like I'll go to a restaurant, there's a long line and I'm like, this ain't worth it.
Oh, 100%. Oh,
and
man.
that I think the same thing could happen here. So I try to be mindful of that. I don't want to take one of the closest spots. Now, someone has to. And I'd say if you're over 80 years old, you're entitled to one of those front few spots by all means. But just be mindful of that. If the parking lot starts looking full, if you're young and reasonably healthy, just park a few spots down from where you normally would. Save a few spaces up front. I've been at churches where the parking lot was never full and it didn't really matter. But Sunday morning is probably more important than other times. Sunday night, Wednesday is probably not as big a deal, but Sunday morning, you just be aware of that. Some other things too is I think the warm greeting right away. And we have people that are selected and go through, just a basic training on how to be a greeter. But this is a job for everybody in the church. We have those initial people that are there and it's their, they take responsibility for that job, but it's everybody's job. It's everybody's responsibility that when someone walks in, we want them to see a friendly face, a smile, a handshake, and just a little bit of get to know you kind of conversation. Well, if you're sitting in the back 4 or 5 rows, that's probably where visitors are going to go. So you need to be most aware of that if someone sits down next to you or on your pew that you don't recognize as a regular member, they're probably a visitor. It's your job. Take that on your shoulders as, even though I'm not an official greeter, maybe it's my job to go and say hi to them.
Make them feel welcome. Like they belong here and like they're not a stranger on this row, Sure, sit down, have a seat.
So you're bringing up a lot of practical, small things that all add up to the experience in which they're there. And it's very similar to customer service experience. We all know when it's bad, right? I mean, you don't have to be told when someone cares or doesn't care about you as a customer, let alone as, a visitor to something as important and special as, worship service. So you need to put on that sense of caring. If your genuineness will shine through. I mean, if you actually seem happy to meet people and repeat their name, do the things that make people feel listened and heard and acknowledged as an individual person, and not just, oh, great, tally mark, we got that visitor. Woo!
That is such an important thing, especially for a repeat visitor.
Well, that's why waiters come to your table and say, hi, my name's Fred, and they might actually ask your name. And, they do all that stuff because it makes you feel like, okay, we're in here together.
Well,
we're in a long haul.
You said something, John, that I've been thinking, which is it's a matter of the heart. What's our attitude towards these people when they walk through the door? Do we really care? And that comes back to like the whole clothing thing, right? Like wear nice clothes to church. Well, wear what is going to show respect to God, certainly, but it comes down to a matter of the heart. Does it really matter if I wear something really nice, but my heart isn't there? No, it doesn't. What's of most concern is where my heart's at. And visitors, anybody, I think when you have a conversation with someone, can tell where your heart's at. Do you really care about that person?
Yeah. We don't have stats here, okay? We don't have a conversion rate. Sometimes I wish we would.
Soon.
I know. I wish we had a conversion rate. But I do know one stat is 100% of people will not return if they do not feel welcome, right? I mean, we know that. That's easy. This is a voluntary thing. You're not getting some sort of handout. You're going to come if you want to be here. So if they can tell by any stretch of the imagination, any feeling that they're not honored, to be there, or we do not, love the fact that they're in our presence.
Honored is a really good word. I mean, that gets back to our text in Romans 12 and verse 10, that in honor, giving preference to one another. It's not that complicated. I mean, if you're at home and say your wife invited a few people over and you're like, okay, I did the lawn this morning. I helped clean up. She's cooking food. I know people are coming over. When they knock on the door and the dog starts barking and she lets people in, are you just going to sit there and keep watching TV? No, you're going to get up and acknowledge that they've entered your house. Now, if you don't like them, you might go back to watching TV, but the way you show honor to them is I'm going to acknowledge that you've entered my house and I'm going to make you feel welcome. And so that's very intuitive when it's at home. It should be as intuitive when we're with our church home.
What a great analogy, Kyle. They're walking into our house. I mean, they are. As far as the church goes, if we call ourselves a church family, then this is where we meet, this is our house. And when they walk in, we want to make them feel welcome.
And there is something powerful about memorizing names, as you said earlier, John. I just wrapped up a week at summer camp. I've been camp director for the last 3 years, and I always make it my job to learn every kid's name. We had 133 kids this year, and during lunch, most of the time I wouldn't eat because it's camp food and it's not very good. I always lose weight at camp. It's great. But during lunch, I'd walk around from table to table and just practice. I'd memorize their names, and I had like a 3 strikes thing where it's like, if I couldn't remember, I'd say, okay, show me your name tag. That's strike 2. Okay, next time I'll get it right. By the end of the week, I feel like, I'll be honest with myself, I feel like I could have got 130. There's probably 2 or 3 of like the littlest kids that I barely saw or flew under the radar, but like I tried my hardest, and I know it makes a big difference that instead of looking at them or looking for their name tag, like they can tell when you're like stalling to figure out their name. If you come up right away and say, hey, John, good to see you here.
Or when they leave, you call them chief or buddy or
hey, sport.
Hey, pal. Hey, man. You do all the... I totally forgot that name.
So when we get a repeat visitor, you say their name, say, hello, so-and-so. It's good to have you back.
Yeah.
That right there will do so much good. And it's hard to even explain why, but that's just...
but if you actually, like with VPS, you have a couple new kids there, when they say their name and it's a difficult name, you're like, Nathaniel. Okay. Yeah. You kind of like, you phonetically say it out slow. Okay. And you say it again. Okay, Nathaniel. I'll remember that, Nathaniel. You kind of make that emphasis because honestly, it has to come off as I'm being acknowledged. And that is such an important thing. We go throughout our entire life in this world trying to avoid people at all times. Literally, I do not want to talk to anyone in a grocery store. I don't even want to talk to someone in a Starbucks. Please stop asking me where I'm going and what my day's like. We try
Dutch Bros is the worst.
We like
have your little rave party and leave me alone.
Yeah. What's your mom's maiden name? We try to avoid that kind of contact, and yet that is why so many people feel alone, isolated, forgotten, and we have so many mental health issues. I think it's because we all try to, at some point in time, avoid some of those things. We can't do that in the Lord's church.
The old saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, is just like screaming in my head right now.
Yeah.
And it's true. When you care about somebody, they care more about you and what you have to say.
Well, one final scripture that comes to my mind is in 1 Corinthians 14. Now, this is a tricky text because it talks about the use of spiritual gifts like speaking in tongues and prophecy and things like that don't really pertain to the church today. That's a discussion for another episode. But it says here that in verse 23 that if the whole church comes together in one place and all speak with tongues, and there comes in those who are uninformed or unbelievers, will they not say that you are out of your mind? Paul is saying if you don't have someone to translate, if you don't have someone to make sense of what you're saying, visitors are going to come in and think, these guys are nuts. I don't want to be here. And so I think the best equivalent I could make is like in Bible class. If you've got your little pet topic, your little hobby topic that, you always like to bring up, maybe a Bible class isn't the place for it. Or as a teacher, if someone keeps bringing up something like that's just not productive and a visitor would be so confused at what you're even talking about, just move the class along and say, let me talk to you afterwards. We'll get together. We'll get together offline and chat about this some more, but maybe Bible class isn't the place. We can only go so far in explaining everything we do every single Sunday, but we should avoid doing things that would be knowingly confusing to a visitor.
Yeah. And so since Sunday morning, I would say most of the time is where you're going to have more visitors or more people in general. I think the things you do in worship are so important to do with that mindset, the greeting, that it'd be really inviting, right? And it not be too flowery and too, anything for, as if we're speaking to members only. I think the song selection, a lot of times I like to do new songs. I'm going to do some new songs here Sunday night, but Sunday morning, it's important to, not everyone knows that song. So of course they wouldn't know it, but does it sound like everyone knows the song? Does the singing sound, well put together? And do they feel, are they uplifted by that? The sermon selection, Sunday mornings, looking at you, both of you, sermon selections are important. Is it too in-depth into a series of something that they might miss out of? I know a lot of times we'll do series on Sunday nights and things like this because Sunday mornings, you might get one-off visitors. So I just think that the way we think about worship is also really important.
Well, and even something I really appreciate here is that we don't do announcements first.
Yeah.
Because that would be, from a visitor standpoint, you walk in and the very
Who are
first...
all these people?
Yeah, exactly. Who are these people? The very first thing is you're taken out of it. Someone gets up, welcomes them, reads a scripture, says a prayer. We're already right into the worship. And that's something I really appreciate here, that at other churches, I mean, I don't want to throw stones or criticize, but maybe just think about from a visitor's perspective if that's the best way to start. Wrapping up this episode, I'd just like to finish by turning it around for you, the listener. Are you someone that is interested in going to church, but maybe it seems intimidating to you? I would hope that you would give it a few tries, that if you visit a church, just understand that if it didn't go exactly the way you wanted to, give a little bit of grace and understand that people are probably just eager to have a visitor. And sometimes, well, maybe they get like all excited, like JoJo, the idiot circus boy with a pretty new pet. And just understand that maybe they're just very eager, and in that excitement, it comes across as too much or intimidating or just like you want them to back off. Or maybe you heard something that was confusing. My advice is if you're visiting a church, give it a few visits. Even if your first visit didn't go very well, show some grace, give it a few tries and try to get to know them. And also make sure the church you're visiting sounds like the one you read about in the Bible. Read the book of Acts. Read about the church in the book of Acts and try to find a church that sounds like what they do in that book.
Well, Kyle, this has been a really insightful episode, and I think a needed one too for us to remember our visitors and what it takes to really make visitors feel welcome when they visit the church. As our listeners, we hope that this has been a valuable episode for you. If you liked what you heard, share it with your friends, like, subscribe. Well, we won't see you next time, but hopefully you'll be there.
And as always, thanks for watching. But seriously, if you have like loud kids, just stay home.
Where do you think I was this morning?
If a visitor walks in with loud kids, scowl at them and point to the cry room.
We should definitely label the cry room, John. Let's get on.
Why I wear the cardigans with holes in them. You know, I want to bring it down one level, right? I don't want to act too dressed up.
You want to pretend like you're from Sanger.
I roll around in the dirt like Pigpen for a minute. And
No, that's the Ranchos.
That's the Ranchos. Oh, here we go. Here's the Ranchos.